Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to lecture number 7 of Software Requirements Engineering CSE305, and in today's lecture we are going to continue our discussion on requirement engineering processes, and specifically we are going to talk about the elicitation process which we started in our previous lecture. Let's quickly recap what we have done in our last lecture. And we talked about two processes of requirement engineering process, and one was the inception process and the other one was the elicitation process. But before we got to it, we discussed what a process is, and although we already did it, but I thought it is necessary to have a certain sort of thinking when you think about any process. So a process is nothing more than a group of tasks or set of activities which you perform in order to achieve certain goal. And whenever an activity is performed, it would either consume something, it will consume something, and when it consumes something, then it's going to produce something, and it can be a work product or anything. So for example, you know, we talked about it yesterday as well. Let's say this huge box is a process of mine, and within which I say there are lots of activities that I do. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4 activities that I do, and there are certain inputs to this process. And these inputs go to, I don't know, these two activities, let's say. So these activities are basically consuming. So they are consuming these inputs. Whatever inputs are coming to this process, they are consuming them. So let's say this big box is the process, and these small things, these are all activities. So this, and you know, this, and these, they are all activities or tasks, we can call them. So whenever an activity is going to consume something, it is going to produce something. So it always produces an output. So this is what an activity is producing. So it produces an output. The output can be in any form. It can be a work product. So work product can be, for example, if your activity is writing code, then the work product will be code. If you're writing specifications, then your output would be an SRS document. So this is normally a generic form in which we show the work product. So let's say they are producing these work products, and these work products, they are then outputs to these two tasks. And finally, they consume these two work products, and then they produce some other work products which are output from this particular process. So this was a definition of a process. And another thing which I mentioned in a process is that whenever we execute a process, then these activities, they are assigned to certain roles, or we call them roles. And by roles, I mean these activities are assigned to certain people who are going to perform these activities. So for example, I say that there are 3 people in my company, person A, and there is a person B, and then there is a person C. So for example, I'm saying that this activity is assigned to person B, and this activity is assigned to person A, and you know, when they get free, then A is assigned this activity and B is assigned the other activity. So normally an activity, it will be assigned to a role. So a process is a set of activities that we execute in order to achieve certain goal, and each activity is going to consume something and it's going to produce something, and activities are normally assigned to roles. So keep these things in mind whenever we talk about whenever you think about any process. And so we took this definition and we talked about what is the inception process, and we said that in an inception process there are certain inputs, and inputs are basically the background or any information that we can get our hands on about the product. So, and we gave an example that, for example, whenever a company wants proposals from lots of different companies, then usually a document is generated which is called a request for proposal, RFP document, and lots of companies are going to submit their proposal based on that RFP. And that RFP actually, what does that RFP document has in it? It basically has some description about what the proposal should be about. It would have certain guidelines, you know, certain costing guidelines, and it would have some technical details as well, that what is the product for which the companies or the software houses have to submit proposals. So RFP is a starting point, but you can also have other sources to have certain inputs. But the output that we desire from the inception process, they are pretty clear. We want to know who the client is. We want to have some knowledge about the stakeholders. We want to break the ice. We want to understand what is the bigger objective or the bigger goal of this software that the client wants us to produce. And moreover, we want to also establish the effectiveness of our communication process. So we know the inputs, we know the outputs. Now we have to execute certain tasks in order to achieve them. And this is what inception process was about. Then we talked about the elicitation process, and we know elicitation is basically that if we just summarize what is elicitation is a process of gathering stakeholder requirements. And the requirement, and what was our definition of requirement? It's a service or a constraint on the system. So there were lots of things we talked about elicitation, but there are two things which I want you to remember again. That elicitation process is a staged activity. It's a staged process where we are going to perform certain activities which would be the first stage, and they would help us in carrying out the next stage of the elicitation process. And when we talk about what is the first stage of the elicitation process, the first stage is basically establishing the objective. So we already have established an overall objective or a bigger goal of the client or of the customer, which he wants to satisfy, which he wants to achieve with the help of this software. But we want to establish very clear objectives. So we want to see what are the business goals. We want to understand what is the problem that needs to be solved. We want to understand the system constraints. And this is the first stage of the elicitation process. Then we move on to and we develop some background. Okay, we want to know how this particular organization is executing current processes, how it is functioning right now without this particular software, or what is the so we want to gain an understanding of the current processes of the organization, because once we do that, only then we can suggest them a better solution, and only then we can be in a position to elicit requirements from people. Because one of the things that we discussed in our last lecture was that normally in an organization there are very few people who are actually problem solvers and who can deal with the situation whatever comes their way, and normally they are so busy that they won't give you enough time, and they won't be able to explain you properly what they want in the system. And at times they are not comfortable with the new system because they, according to them, they already have whatever it takes to solve the problem. So why should we go for another system? So if we understand the current processes of an organization, only then we can convince those people, because only then we will be able to tell them, okay, this is the problem and this is how we can suggest you a solution. So the second stage is understanding the background of the organization and of the processes whichever are happening in that particular organization. Then we want to organize our knowledge. We through this process we would have identified lots of different stakeholders. We have identified lots of different goals. Now we want to organize whatever we have, so that the final stage, which is of specifically collecting requirements, so that we can actually manage it in a better fashion. And in the final stage, we go to stakeholders, we ask stakeholder requirements, we try to identify domain requirements, and we also try to identify what is the overall organizational requirements. So elicitation process, it's a staged process, and each stage complements the following stage. And another thing which I want you guys to remember from our previous lecture was that whenever we are eliciting requirements, as I said, that elicitation is by definition it's a process that's going to produce lots of different things, and from all the set of requirements that we have gathered from different stakeholders, all of them won't be part of our final specification document, because we are going to elicit lots of requirements which are incomplete. We are going to generate lots of requirements which are unnecessary, or there would be some requirements which are infeasible. So we need a check to actually identify all those problematical requirements, so that whenever we go for negotiation, we have in our mind, okay, these were the problematic requirements and we need to resolve these issues. Only then we will be able to move to the analysis phase. So there are few things that we do, and so partially we conduct a small analysis. So what we do is we conduct a small analysis check, and in those different type of checks that we are going to do, the first one is necessity checking. And in necessity checking, we try to identify what are the requirements which are unnecessary, because as I said, that there would be lots of different people who would be telling you lots of their wishes as well. But those wishes, they are not in line with the goals or the objectives that the key stakeholder they want in the for which they want the product. So we need to identify, okay, what are the unnecessary requirements. The second check that we are going to do is for consistency and completeness. We want to identify all those requirements which are incomplete and which are not consistent with each other. So we need to identify all the contradictions between different requirement statements that we have gathered from different stakeholders. So that's the second sort of problematical requirements that we are going to identify. The third one is feasibility checking. We also need to identify what are the infeasible requirements that we have identified, which we will not be able to complete given the limited resources that we have, and the limited, and when we talk about resources, it means budget, time, and all the other kind of resources that we are being provided. So these are the three kind of problematical requirements that we are going to identify. Number 1, number 2, number 3. And why this is necessary? Because we are going to conduct a small negotiation as well, because we are going to go back to the client and say, okay, those are the three kind of problematical requirements we have identified. We are going to discuss them with you. But before discussing, the one thing that you do is we try to prioritize those problematical requirements. So there would be some of those requirements which are really, really important, but we have found that there are consistency or contradictions but they are incomplete. So we'll prioritize them. We are going to resolve these first, and then we'll move on to the other ones. And we try to achieve an agreement. So it is sort of similar to the overall negotiation process, where we try to reconcile requirements and where we try to satisfy all the stakeholders. So again, we are going to do something similar. So in elicitation, we have some analysis checks as well, and we have we also do some sort of negotiation as well. In today's lecture, we are going to talk about, as I already told you, we are going to talk about the elicitation process, and specifically we are going to talk about stakeholders, that who are stakeholders of the system, and how do we identify, what is the importance of different stakeholders. And we are also going to do a small class exercise where I will ask you guys to look at a problem and try to identify who are the stakeholders in that particular in that case. Okay, so who are stakeholders? Stakeholders are the people who are needed to ensure the success of a project. It is essential to find out whom they are, what their attitudes are, and what their interests are. Some of them have to contribute with money and effort, and they must feel they get something in return. Otherwise, they won't support the project, and they may even obstruct it. So in general, I think we already defined stakeholders. So stakeholder, we said, we gave a very generic definition. We said that stakeholders is anybody who has any interest in the project, and it can be a competitor as well. So he is also a stakeholder. But in terms of requirements engineering process, stakeholders definition is slightly restricted in a way, because we only are interested in those stakeholders who we need. And we need them because we want to elicit requirements from them, we want to validate requirements with them, and we want to negotiate requirements with them, because those are the stakeholders who are going to tell us what they want in the product, and they are going to approve that whether the product that we have built is right or not, and they are going to finance. So basically, in terms of the elicitation process, in terms of project management, the bigger definition of stakeholder does apply. But when we talk about the requirements engineering process, then maybe stakeholders are only those people who we need to ensure the success of the project. And it is always essential, and we've said that that we need to identify all the stakeholders, because if we miss one of the key stakeholders, and he is a person who is responsible for conducting lots of very critical processes in the organization, then we will not be able to gain insights from that particular person. And we are going to miss on lots of very features which are very important. So identifying stakeholders is very important. We also need to understand their attitudes and what their interests are, because in the end we need to satisfy them. And as we always say that the customer is always right, it cannot be always applied to softwares, because if we always believe that customer is right, then whatever he's going to say us, we have to actually do it. But that's not the case. And if you start doing that, then you will not be able to complete your product on time. So again, it doesn't apply to softwares as such, but we need to give stakeholders some importance, and we need to understand that, okay, how I'm going to satisfy this guy, because he is so problematical and he's got so many attitude problems. So you need to figure out that how to deal with a certain person. And at times, few of those people are the key sponsors. And when I say sponsors, because those guys are going to give you money for whatever you're going to produce. So whenever somebody gives you some money, especially, then they want to actually see some outputs. So for example, you're making a software, you're making this learning management system for a particular university, and but the key sponsor is the rector or the vice chancellor of that university, and you want to have something in your software which is some sort of reporting or some sort of interface for the rector or the vice chancellor, so that he can also see, okay, we assigned this much budget to this particular project. What are we getting from it, and what kind of information I can extract from this particular software. So for example, the vice chancellor wants to see that how many students we have in the university right now, how many graduates we are going to produce in this particular year, and how many faculty members do we have. So these kind of information, maybe there can be different kinds of reports that can be generated. So you need to show something to that particular guy so that he also feels that they are getting something out of it. And so there are certain key stakeholders. We need to specifically identify them. We need to identify their interests, their attitudes, and we need to satisfy them. So this is very important in terms of requirements engineering process, and specifically the elicitation process. So when we are analyzing stakeholders, we basically try to answer these kind of questions. That number one is, who are the stakeholders? Whenever we are going to start a project, we would only know a few people. For example, let's imagine that you have that request for proposal, and normally there would be names of a particular department or name of a couple of people who you would contact in terms of that RFP. And whenever you are making that proposal, they would say that if you have any questions, then please contact us on this number or this guy. And so basically that's the only person you know at the beginning. So you need to ask them that, okay, I have some so ask them questions about different areas of that software that you understand, and if that person would not be able to answer that question, he would direct you to some other guy. So this is how you actually identify more people who would be part of the system. And when you understand the problem area, or you understand the application domain, that also helps you in identifying more stakeholders. What goals do they see for the system? Many stakeholders look not only at their own goals, but also at other stakeholders' goals. For example, I am the project manager, I am the project manager, and I've asked the company, okay, build me a software where I can manage my projects. And I have a very big team under me. I have different leads of different units, and then I have lots of other resources who are working under me. And I have assigned them different tasks. I want to do all this monitoring on my own. But I also want to see that, what are the other features which are being built for my team leads, or which are built for my other resources in my team, because I want them to also use this particular software. So we have to identify that what are the goals of different stakeholders, and we also need to identify that what do they perceive would be the goals of other stakeholders of this particular system. And another question that we need to ask, that what would they like to contribute? So we are going to ask from different stakeholders that what would be their input, and then their reward basically. So what risks and costs do they see? What kind of solutions, suppliers and resources do they see? Should we replace the old system or extend it, make it ourselves or buy it? The first thing is we identify the stakeholders, then we try to identify their goals, then we identify their contributions, and we try to perceive what do they think of this particular solution, and what do they think should we do when we are going to solve this particular problem. So these are the questions that we normally ask when we try to analyze different stakeholders. By analysis, we mean analysis not only include identifying stakeholders, it also include identifying their interests, their attitudes, and all those things that we previously talked about. So who are the stakeholders? If the product is to be used internally in a large company, stakeholders might include the sponsor who pays for the product because he wants value for his money. Daily users from various departments, they have to live with the product, and without their support, there will be no success. Managers of the department, they want business advantages from the system. The company's customers, clients of the system, often they will see changes too, and without their support, there will be no business advantage. Business partners, for instance, suppliers, carriers, and banks, if they will see changes, their support is essential too. So normally, when we say that a software is being produced, then the software is going to be used by a certain end users. So they are usually the stakeholders. That's very easy to identify. But then there is this guy who's going to pay for this project. He's also the stakeholder. Then the business manager who are sitting above those end users, they are also stakeholders, and your clients, they are also your stakeholders. And if there is anybody involved in form of suppliers or contractors, and because when you are going to deploy this new software in your organization, then there would be lots of changes in different processes, and the way you used to do things might change. So the people who used to deal with previously, they would also be affected in some fashion, so they are also stakeholders. Now let's consider our example of that learning management system. And in terms of that LMS, we can say that who is the sponsor. So sponsor would be maybe the vice chancellor or the rector of the university, because he is going to finally approve it, and he's going to give you some money that, okay, we want this particular software. And then, or maybe the board of governors of a university, and daily users from various departments. So there would be lots of departments that we have talked about associated with learning management system. For example, different faculties, and if we think about faculties from different departments, then maybe that can be a grouping as well. And then maybe some administration would be also part of it. People from the exams department, they would also be part of it. So there would be multiple end users. And then there would be managers of these departments. For example, when we talk about faculty and user category, then there would be maybe the head of the departments or dean of different faculties. They would be kind of the managers. And then administration, we can have heads of administration. Similarly, in terms of exam, we can have controller examination who want to oversee how the end users are actually using this particular product. And when we talk about the customers, these are going to be, for example, your students' parents, because they are your clients, and they want to see, because the way things used to happen, it's going to affect them as well. So they also want to see, okay, what's happening now, and what are the change processes as such. Or at times you can also put students in it as well, because students are also your clients. And then finally you have those business partners, for instance suppliers, carriers, and banks. So maybe you are automating the fee submission process and these kind of things, and you want to include banks into it as well. And there are people who supply stationery to you, for example, and you have your exam scheduled, and you also want to generate that how many question papers or how many bundles of different papers you want the supplier to send. So maybe they are also your stakeholders. So I don't know, maybe paper contractors, they can be your stakeholders. So these would be the stakeholders when we talk about our learning management system according to this particular definition. Moreover, the authorities, for instance, the safety inspectors, the auditors, the local government, they would also be your stakeholders. IT people, hotline staff in case the product is developed in-house, other people providing resources for the product. If we talk about product development for a market, some of these stakeholders are not in our own company, but in our client's company. The daily users of the product at the client side, managers and sponsors at the client side, IT people at the client side, distributors and value orders for our product. So basically, there are lots of different people who are stakeholders to this product. And so why there is so much emphasis on the stakeholders? Because they are key to the success of this elicitation process. If we are not able to identify different people who are going to tell us what to do in our system, then we won't be able to build a system successfully. So that's why so much importance is given to identifying stakeholder, and not only identifying, analyzing each stakeholder, that what does he or she want from the system, and how do we satisfy this particular guy. So it is very important to think about all these things whenever we are trying to identify the stakeholders. So these are the things that we do when we are doing the stakeholder analysis. Okay, now I want you guys to think about and list all the possible stakeholders for a library cataloging system. I hope so a library cataloging system is, you have a huge library which is, let's say, manual, and the books are being recorded. For example, you got a new book and you manually enter it that we have got a new book, and you're numbering it. You want to automate this whole system. You want to do all the borrowing, all the issuing, and you want to do it online, and you want to have an online catalog of your library of all the resources, books, magazines, CDs, and all those video lectures, everything you want to have an electronic record. So let's take 2-3 minutes, and in the meantime, what you guys do is think about and list all the stakeholders for a library cataloging system. So I hope you have identified the stakeholders of the library cataloging system. But so let's think about who are the users of the library cataloging system. So that would be the first kind of stakeholders that you should have identified, because normally they are very easy to identify, because all of us are familiar with the library processes. So who are the library users? It can be different people. It can be students, or a journal, or it can be faculty, or it can be so everybody who is going to issue or books from the library, that's one category of the users. Then there would be library staff, who is going to actually use this system. For example, who is going to issue a book, and who is going to take a book back, and these kind of, so that's another category is library staff. Then maybe the librarian. And so the next is library staff, who is responsible for cataloging. So the first one is this student and faculty. Then you have this staff. Then you have this library management, which is maybe the librarian or any senior person who is actually looking after the overall operations. And then you have some library staff responsible for providing user assistance. For example, you have problems in searching a different kind of a book, so you would might have people who would basically help you out in searching a book and figuring out where the book is. Then you have certain book publishers who can be indirect users of this system, because you might have book publishers involved with you, and whenever a new edition of a book publishes, then they notify you and things like that. So it can also be automated in the system. Then you might have the system developers who are going to actually develop this particular system. They are also stakeholders. And managers of other library automation systems, they are also stakeholders, because they are one key resource, because you can go and talk to them, and they can also help you understanding the process, understanding the domain, and understanding the problem area in general. So I hope you guys came up with a list of stakeholders which was similar to my list of stakeholders for a library cataloging system. So that is all from our discussion on stakeholders and stakeholder analysis, and how do you do this, or how do you conduct this stakeholder analysis. Next up are different elicitation techniques that we are going to talk about now. And if you guys remember, when we discussed elicitation task, when we were briefly talking about requirements engineering process, then we talked about two techniques, and the one of them was collaborative requirement gathering, and the other one was quality function deployment. And but this is kind of a more detailed discussion, that what are the broader techniques that can be deployed whenever we are conducting this elicitation process. So these techniques are basically they are divided into different categories, because the knowledge about because when we are eliciting requirements, we are gathering knowledge about the system, and normally this knowledge is structured in three possible ways. The first one is partitioning, where we are aggregating related knowledge, where what we try to do is we have identified different areas of the product that we are producing, and now what we are doing is we are trying to partition different areas, and we are aggregating all the things which are related to one. Then the other kind of structuring of the knowledge is abstraction. We try to recognize what are the general features, or we are trying to identify all the generalities in the system. Then the final is projection. We try to organize according to perspective, perspective of who, perspective of different stakeholders. And generally in elicitation, the problems that we face is that we don't have enough time for elicitation, because we have to produce something and we have to show something to our client, and at times people push us into showing us something, so we are not being given enough time to actually ask stakeholders, okay, what is their perspective, and what are the generalities, and how do we aggregate different areas of the system. So, and we have inadequate preparation by engineers, and stakeholders are unconvinced for the need of a new system. That we have already discussed, that this is generally an elicitation problem. So depending on this structuring of the knowledge about the system, or the way we structure knowledge about the system, partitioning, abstraction, and projection, there are different techniques which are deployed, okay, which help us to achieve that. And what are those techniques? These techniques are: you can conduct interviews, you can have scenarios, you can have soft system methods, you can have observation and social analysis, and you can have requirements reuse. So these are the different techniques in journal which are used for elicitation. So let's quickly see what we do in those elicitation interviews. The requirement engineer or the analyst discusses the system with different stakeholders and build up an understanding of their requirements. What are the different types of interviews? The interviews are generally categorized into two different types. Closed interviews, the requirements engineer looks for the answers to a predefined set of questions. So normally in a closed interview, what you would have is you would have a questionnaire already prepared, and you're going to take it alongside, and you're going to ask question number 1, 2, and let's say you have 10 questions. You're going to ask all those 10 questions, and you're going to only take answers to those particular questions. And the other kind of interviews which are more sort of interesting are open interviews. And why they're interesting? Because there is no predefined agenda, and the requirement engineer discusses in an open-ended way what stakeholders want for the system. Now there are pros and cons associated to both these types of interviews, the closed and the open interview, because in a closed interview the agenda is fixed and the discussion is going to be really focused. Okay. Whereas in an open interview, that is not the case. In an open interview, you have no specific agenda, and you're generally taking a perspective from a certain stakeholder. So you can basically see that where these different kind of or what sort of interview technique can be used to structure what kind of knowledge. For example, when we are talking about the perspective structuring, where we want to take perspectives of different stakeholders, then maybe an open interview would be the case. But whereas when we are partitioning, then we want to have really closed interviews, because we want to stay really focused, and we want to really identify, okay, what are, for example, let's say for this category, what are the requirements that you want, and so you want to have a very specific and agenda focused interview. So normally, what are the things that we need to take care of when we are taking interviews? Interviewers must be open-minded and should not approach the interview with preconceived notions about what is required. So if I am a requirement engineer and I've been given a task to conduct these interviews, then I should be a person who does not have perceived already a solution of the problem. Because if I would be convinced about option A, and so I would not be kind of paying too much attention to somebody who suggests me, okay, no, there is an option B, or this is what I really want. So there should not be any preconceived notions as an interviewer. Stakeholders must be given a starting point for discussion. So this is very important, because one of the problems that we said in the elicitation is that is sort of similar to Inception, which is breaking the ice. Because normally people, at times some people are not good at expressing themselves, and if you expect them that you would ask them maybe a simple question and they are going to respond to it, so their response would be very, very, very particular, and they will not give you detailed information that you actually desire. So you need to initiate the discussion. You need to give them a starting point. It can be a question, it can be a proposal in an existing. So for example, you can say, okay, we have developed a similar system, and this is what we did in that system. So what do you think of it? So you can try to provoke them and try to get something out of them. Interviewers must be aware of organizational politics, and this is something very important. When we talk about organizations in general, then there are different frames in the organization, or there are different angles from which we gain our understanding of an organization, and one of the frames is the political frames. And so organizational politics play a very important role in terms of any new change that is going to happen in the organization. And for example, when you talk about a software being done for any organization, that's a huge change. So an interviewer needs to be aware of organizational politics, because many real requirements may not be discussed because of their political implications. Because for example, there are two different groups in the organization, and one group is not for this particular software. So they may not tell you lots of very important things, because they actually don't want this to be a successful endeavor. So they are not going to tell you a lot of details, so that you actually fail, or so you need to be aware that what is the politics of this particular organization, and how do we get things out from those different political groups which are existing in the organization. And this is generally a guideline. I mean, this is not the only things that you would not or should not do in an interview, but you should keep those things in mind. Preparation is always good. So the first thing is that you need to prepare thoroughly for the meeting. you need to have a checklist prepared for the meeting, and you need to have properly rehearsed introduction, because as we say, the first impression is the last impression. So whenever you go and talk to somebody, then the way you introduce yourself is going to have a huge impact on whatever output you're going to get from that particular interview session. And do ask about the success access to the stakeholders. Do ask about access to previous systems, and do book the next meeting. So for example, it's always a good idea to book the next meeting, because if you guys remember, then when we do that analysis checking, and when we do those we follow it up with negotiation, we are going to actually need to talk to stakeholders again. So even if we have gathered all the different requirements from that particular client, and we think that we are not going to get any more requirements from this particular guy, we still need to book a next meeting, because we may need to come back and talk to that person, okay, that this is the final list that we have got. Even if you don't have any contradictions or any incomplete or inconsistent or infeasible requirements, even then you need to give some input to that particular person. So it's always a good idea to book a next meeting. And do ask about quality requirements, and you also there are two things. One is the requirements which are essential. One kind of requirements are the features that the end user want in the system. Then there may be some things which are wishes, and which the client actually wants, that if the solution is really, really nice, then this thing would be done in this particular fashion. Or what should be the speed of that system? How good the system should perform? So you need to also ask the client that what kind of response they expect from the system. And do make sure you know who you are talking to and why. So you need to do a background check of that stakeholder. So a background check is not the security check, but you need to understand. So the stakeholder analysis is an input to this interviewing part of the elicitation process. So any technique that we deploy, for example, we are talking about the interviews right now. So the analysis that we have done is very helpful in conducting any interview, because we need to know the person whom we are talking to. And we need to also ask this guy about the deadlines. If there are any deadlines on how long this should take or how long this should be done, we need to also discuss them. So these are general do's and don'ts in an interview. So there are a few more don'ts. That don't interrupt the customer. So normally it's not a good idea that a stakeholder is giving you a response on a particular question that you have asked, and during his response you have thought of another thing. And so I've seen people that they interrupt others, whenever that is the case. So do not ever do that, because this is not a good idea. Even if you have a certain question, from the response that he is giving, you should pay very good attention to the client whenever he is giving you a response, because this is very important. You need to look interested in whatever he is suggesting. And the second don't is that don't interrupt each other. For example, if there are 2-3 requirements analysts that are being sent for this particular interview, then if your colleague is asking a particular question, then you don't need to correct him. If he says something and you say things like, okay, no, I think this is what he means. No, this is actually the right thing to do. So don't interrupt your colleague, because if he was not competent enough, then you should not have brought him along. But if he or she is there, then you need to let him talk. So this is very important. Don't interrupt each other. And normally whenever you go in an interview, then you need to take approval from the stakeholder that can I record this interview, and don't ever do it without asking the stakeholder, because this may offend the stakeholder, or this may affect your interviewee. So it is very important that always take approval before you start recording any interviews. Okay, before I start discussing that how do we create these effective questions, there are a few other things which I can think of that you should not do. Is that when you go for an interview, then you're not actually supposed to give them the requirements or give the client the requirement. You need to take their opinion. And another thing, that do not always try to gold plate things, that okay, we can do this in such and such fashion, because this is not a good idea. And don't ask questions related to budget, because usually in your initial meetings you don't do that. And again, arguing among yourselves, this is not a good idea. So these are general don'ts of an interview that you need to keep in your mind. So let's talk about now that how do we create effective questions. The first thing that we need to think about is the wording that we are going to use in a question. And if you guys remember, then we said that there are different stakeholders, and a few of the things that we need to consider is that the knowledge and the experience of different stakeholders. So according to if we know the person whom we are going to interview, then we need to use words in the questions which are appropriate for his experience or for his technical background. The second thing that we need to keep in our mind is we need to ask context-free questions. We need to also consider that whether the questions that we are putting in the questionnaire, whether they are open-ended and close-ended, because when we have open-ended questions, then their responses might be longer. So if we are scheduling an interview, we need to actually think about the timing aspect, that if we are going to meet this guy only for 30 minutes, we need to be really focused. We need to have close-ended questions. We cannot have 30 open-ended questions, because then open-ended questions, normally their answers are pretty long, and they kind of involve a discussion rather than a direct response. So you need to also consider these things, that whether you should put open-ended or close-ended questions. And they are also when you're thinking about what kind of questions to choose, it also depends who is your stakeholder. And according to your stakeholder, you think that, okay, what kind of questions would be really interesting. And again, remember that we try to structure our knowledge into 3 different categories: partitioning, abstraction, and the final one was different perspective of different stakeholders. So it depends what kind of structuring you want to do, and based on that you would either have open-ended or closed-ended questions. And normally avoid double-barrel questions. So it should not be the case that you have a question which has further questions in it, because it would kind of make the whole discussion very confusing and very difficult to actually comprehend for the interviewee and for you as well. And finally is you should have categories of questions. It's always a good idea to actually list all the questions and then try to group them together, so that because it's when you group the questions, then the question related to a particular process or a particular function of the user, when you ask them all together, then it helps the interviewee to focus, and he might not be able to tell something important in the first question, but by the time you have, let's say, 5 questions for a particular process, about a particular process, and you are going to talk to with this stakeholder about 5 different processes, and for each process you have 5 questions. And so you might not be able to remember everything when you ask the first question, but if you keep on asking the similar question from the similar process, then he would remember lots of things, and he is going to give you some useful input. So normally it's a good idea to have categories of questions, So try to categorize your questionnaire as well. So let's look at a generic context-free interview. So the part 1 is establishing the customer or the user profile. And what kind of questions should be there when you are trying to understand that, okay, who is this person I'm actually talking to? So maybe you would ask his name, obviously the company, industry, and his job title. So the above information is entered in advance, so you already have this information. So what you're going to do when you want to gain some understanding about his role in the organization. So your first question might be, what are your key responsibilities? What output do you produce? For whom you produce that output, and how is the success of that particular output is gauged and measured? Which problem interfere with your success? And what, if any, trends make your job easier or more difficult? Okay. So if you guys consider these kind of questions, then we are not actually trying to ask any question which is we are not giving an impression that we actually know the context in which this particular user sits in, or what is the context of this particular guy, and we are just asking the other question, that what are your key responsibilities, what is your output, how do you measure it, and these are very generic questions. But interesting thing is that if you talk to different people about then different people might give you different details. Some people might give you very straight answers and very short answers, 2-3 words, but some people might give you some very interesting information. So this is just a sample that you are trying to establish your customer or the user profile. Then part 2 is you're trying to access the problem. You're trying to assess the problem. So for which application or type or problem do you lack good solution? Okay, so you're trying to understand that we already saw that what are the problems that interfere with your success. We have already talked about it. Now next question we are going to ask is that that what problem, for what kind of a problem you do not have a solution or you lack a solution, and what are they. For each problem, ask the following questions. Why does this problem exist? So that would help you in getting an understanding that what are the flaws in their current process, how do you solve it now, and how do they actually go about it in the current setting or in the current solution that they're using, and how would you like to solve it, or what according to you is a better solution. So we have built the user profile, we have identified few problems. Now for each problem we are going to ask very specific questions, that why the problem exists and how they actually solve it now, and what would they like to have in order to have a better solution at their hands, or better way to actually deal with those problems. Now in part 3 we're trying to understand the user environment. So who are the users, what is their educational background, what is their computer background, are user experienced with this type of application, which platforms are in use, what are your plan for future platforms. So we want to know, we want to build in general that the usability requirements, because we want to build a system which is usable by the end users. So we want to know that what is their knowledge of these kind of application that we are producing. For example, if an organization is already familiar with an ERP system and they were using a different kind of an enterprise resource planning software, then they are already trained people, and if we are going to propose them a new ERP system, then our system should be actually better than that, and our system can have some additional features which maybe are complex than the previous one. But if an ERP is going to be deployed for the first time in an organization, then things need to be really simple, and the usability requirements need to be thought, and so basically the environment of the user actually affects the end product that we are going to produce. And environment includes the background of the user, computer knowledge, which platforms they are using, whether they are familiar with these kind of applications, and if they want to switch to different platforms, then we need to ask these kind of things as well. Then there can be more questions. For example, are additional applications in use that are relevant to this application? For example, there can be many legacy systems that an organization use, and they might want to use it even in future. So you want to also talk about them. What are your expectations for usability of the product? For example, you also need to ask that guy that, what do they expect the new product to be like, and how long should the new product take them to be familiar with that product? And what are your expectations for training time? What kind of user help, for example, hard copy or online documentation do you need? For example, do you want the help within the application, or you want some documentation in hard form so that you can actually go and look for a certain feature in a book and use that particular system. So again, you're building about the user environment. And next is who in your organization need the application. Okay, so we are trying to identify the opportunity, that who are the people who actually would be using this particular application that we are producing. How many of these type of users would use the application? We're trying to identify the number of people. We have identified that who are going to use this application. Now we want to see that how many people are actually going to use it. How would you value a successful solution? So we also are trying to gauge that what would be the value of a good solution to this particular client or this particular stakeholder. And now we are asking some question related to reliability and the support that the end users might expect, or the interviewee might expect. What are your expectations for reliability? What are your expectations for performance? Will you support the product, or will others support it? Do you have special need for support? What about the maintenance and service access? So we try to gauge. We're not only discussing, or trying to understand how we are not only trying to understand the current processes, and we have identified different problems in this interview, but we are also trying to gauge that what according to the user is a good solution. And when we talk about good solution, we also are trying to ask questions which would help us in determining the reliability, the performance, and these kind of issues, and support needs of the client as well. And what are the security requirements? What are the installation and configuration requirements? are there special licensing requirements, and how will the software be distributed? So we basically are building upon the information that we gathered. So we started with very generic user profile questions, then we asked then we gained our understanding about that what are the problems that the user is facing in the current process and what kind of solution he expects. Then we talked about that who are the key people, and what is the number of those people, and what are the usability requirements of the end user. And then we moved to some quality requirements. We are trying to gauge that what kind of reliability you expect from the product, what kind of performance you expect from the product, and what are your security requirements, or what kind of installation and configuration requirement do you have, and how the software will be distributed in the end. So this was just a sample of a context-free interview that you can do, but again, depending on your analysis of the stakeholder and depending on the context of your stakeholder and the overall context in which the software is built, you can basically build your own questions. And always remember that you need to have questions in an interview which are context free. You need to think about that whether you want open-ended or closed-ended questions, and you need to be very careful about the wording that you use in your questions. So that's it from today's lecture. Let's quickly summarize that what we have done, or what are the things that we have already talked about the elicitation process. So today we specifically talked about stakeholder analysis. So in today's lecture we talked about the elicitation process, and specifically we have talked about two things. We have talked about stakeholders, and we have talked about different elicitation techniques. And when we talked about stakeholders, then we said that we need to perform stakeholder analysis. And what does this analysis include? It not only includes identifying stakeholders. So identifying stakeholders is the first bit. You also want to identify their attitudes and their interests, and you also want to know how to satisfy this particular client. So when we say analysis, then it's an in-depth study of different stakeholders that you are going to elicit requirements from. And then we started talking about different elicitation techniques. But before we got to it, we said that when we elicit requirements, then we are actually gaining knowledge about the system, and we need to structure that knowledge. And the knowledge is normally structured in three forms. We try to partition our knowledge, and when we say we partition, we basically try to aggregate requirements for a particular area. The second is we try to achieve some abstraction, and in abstraction we ask very general question. We generalize basically in abstraction. So we generalize. And then the final one was perspective, where we try to take perspective of different stakeholders. And depending of what kind of how we are trying to structure knowledge, your elicitation technique would vary. For example, the one elicitation technique that we have discussed in today's lecture are interviews. Now, as I said, that if you want to elicit very specific requirements from a certain stakeholder, then you are basically targeting you're partitioning your requirements. Then your interview would be different. Your interview might be close-ended. You will be asking very specific questions because you want very specific answers for those questions. Whereas if you are generalizing, or if you want to take perspective of that stakeholder, then your interview, it can have open-ended questions. So a similar technique would be used in a different fashion if I'm trying to structure my knowledge in different ways. And as I said, that normally it's not just one interview that you're going to have with one stakeholder. You will need to talk to this particular guy multiple times, and you build on information. So maybe in general you would structure information, you would generalize requirement, you would take perspective of the stakeholders, but in your later meetings you're going to ask very specific close-ended questions. So, and we also talked about in general how do we prepare interviews and what are the do's and don'ts in an interview. So there are certain things that we should do in an interview and we should avoid certain things. And we saw towards the end of the lecture, we saw a sample context-free interview which was organized into different sections. So we started with building the profile of the client, and then we started identifying, okay, what are the current problems being faced by this guy in the current in the current process, and and we try to identify, that how these problems according to him can be solved, and then we move to other questions, that who are the users, other users of this particular system, and we try to identify some quality requirements as well, which include the usability requirements, and we talked about reliability, security, and system. So in an interview you can basically have all these sort of questions, but it depends on your context, and it depends on whether this is your first meeting with the client, whether this is your second meeting with the client, but that was just a sample context-free interview. And as I said, that you need to prepare questions according to your context. But we also talked about what are the things that you need to consider when you are preparing questions. That, for example, you need to be very careful about wording of the questions. You need to have you should avoid double-barrel questions. You should think about the open-ended and close-ended aspect of the questions when you are preparing a questionnaire. That's it from today's lecture. We are going to continue our discussion about elicitation techniques in the next lecture. So take care, and Allah Hafiz.